Wayne will start us off by explaining those, and then we'll have some Q&A with TSPC staff, Kristen Rush, and then we'll have some breakout group discussions so we can all have a chance to discuss those standards and what we think needs to be uplifted and what we need to revise. So with that, I'll hand it over to Wayne and Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize if it doesn't look like I'm looking at you because I have 3 screens up since I'm going to be presenting. But I appreciate the opportunity to let you know about our current approach to rulemaking and the rules that we're going to be looking at in particular. And I've been asked to introduce each of the staff people that are involved with this particular agency. And as you are well aware, our executive director is part of the council, Dr. Tony Rosiles, and he is here. I also have other staff people that are part of our program approval unit. And actually, we changed our name. We're now the Educator Preparation and Pathways unit. But let me just briefly introduce them. You already know also Kristen Rush, who is a colleague of mine on this staff in this particular unit. We also have Dr. Susan Bowe, who is here and will be taking one of the breakout groups, I believe. I can't remember because I can't see anyone else. Is Dr. Mondragon here?
I'm here. Hi.
Hi. This is Dr. Shara Mondragon with TSPC as well. I believe Kirsten Plumau is here today as well.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for showing us your lovely screens. And right now I'll go ahead and I think I've got everybody. Right now I'll go ahead and
I'm here too, Wayne. It's Rochelle.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rochelle Kratz. Yes, Rochelle is also with TSPC and also works very much with the EPPs. So that's kind of our staff, our colleagues that work together. We all work together very closely on this particular area of program approval, especially, but also non-traditional pathways, multiple measures, just a number of different areas that we're involved in. So let me go ahead and get started because I know we have a lot to accomplish this morning. And we're just going to take a look briefly at the current framework, some of the current rules that are in place, especially as relates to early literacy. Let's see how quickly my slides go. Okay. One of the things that it's important to know about our educator prep programs in the state of Oregon is that they're reviewed multiple times by various agencies. It begins with the fact that there's a requirement in the state of Oregon as part of our rules that every teacher ed program must be part of a university that is accredited institutionally by the Northwest Commission of Colleges and Universities. That may change a little bit because they have removed the regional nuance with regard to institutional accreditation. And so, for example, someone could be approved by another former regional accreditor, such as the Higher Learning Commission or the Western Association of Colleges and Universities. So, but for right now, I believe every one of the EPPs are accredited by the Northwest Commission. And that's an accreditation review that takes place every 7 years. And again, it's institutional. It doesn't focus upon educator programs per se. We also have national educator accreditors. And again, the state of Oregon requires that every EPP must have national accreditation. So currently there are 2 national organizations that accredit teacher education programs. We also have the requirement that they must be approved by Oregon. And in fact, Oregon supersedes any of the national educator accreditors. So if we see an issue that is not being attended to adequately by national accreditation, then we will go ahead and address that issue ourselves. We are involved in review of institutions, teacher ed programs on two different levels. We conduct a program review that's usually in about the 5th year of a cycle. And then we also conduct with the National Educator accreditor, we conduct a unit review, which is the overall teacher education program. In addition, all new programs, all major modifications are reviewed by TSBC, and we follow up with a focus program review once they have some cycles of data so that they can validate the effectiveness of their program. We also have, whoops, what happened here? We also can show this pictorially. Kristen Rush has put this together. We have program standards. We also have regulations that validate what kind of knowledge and skills and dispositions a candidate must have in order to be licensed in the state of Oregon. They are required to go through clinical practices. Usually for the basic requirement is 600 hours in terms of clinical practices in which they are supervised by the university, but also by a cooperating teacher or mentor. They are required to demonstrate knowledge of their skills and content, but also knowledge of their clinical practices through various candidate performance assessments that we require. And then finally, the university acknowledges, the EPP acknowledges that this candidate is ready to be licensed and will put together a program completion report for us, which then triggers the fact that they can apply for a license with our licensing unit of teacher standards and practices. TSBC operates in its rulemaking capacity based on ORS 342-120 through 232. The specific requirements to teach in Oregon K-12 public schools is based on this set of statutes. It should be noted we also enforce these standards on the private institutions, private EPPs as well. There are two types of rules that TSBC sets forth related to our early literacy work. One, which we are not going to focus on right now, is the licensure rules for educators, and that will be the focus of the March 2024 deadline. For today, we're going to be focusing upon program standards for educator prep providers, and that's the focus of our work and to lead up to the December 2023 deadline. Program standard statutes include usually the scope of the license as well as the responsibilities. I think one of the things that can happen is that you could view these program standards as competencies. Each program standard set of rules includes the educator discipline or endorsement for the license, including, for example, today, reading intervention, a list of standards or competencies that the educator is expected to meet in order to teach. TSP is responsible to regularly monitor and review program standards and compliance with the standards. The program standards that are really the focus of our review are as follows: OAR 584-420-15, which really has to do with reading instruction program standards. OAR 584-420-16, which is instruction on dyslexia and other reading difficulties program standards, and OAR 584-420-440, which is our reading interventionist program standards. These standards are required by the elementary multiple subjects as well, even though it's not part of those standards. If a person wants to put together a program or wants to be licensed, they must also demonstrate facility with these particular standards, these particular specific literacy standards. I'm going to go through this very quickly just to show you that we are operating on a number of fronts in terms of review and in terms of working with EPPs. It's critical to know that the program standards are stated in terms of competencies to measure the programs and the effectiveness of the programs. It really does not include specific requirements on inputs usually, such as how many credits or what courses have to be included. That is something that is set by the university, by the EPP. They have their curriculum experts, and they guide the approval of that curriculum. The Early Literacy Council can be thought of as really the governor's work group that will make recommendations to TSPC with regard to what those program standards should comprise and look like. A focused program review will also be scheduled after we put the new standards into place. After they have collected 2 cycles of data, then we will schedule a time to review their programs and make recommendations to them and measure their effectiveness and their impact. But basically, just to show you our timeline, there's a request to revise the standards. We also periodically revise our standards because things change all the time. We're especially interested in finding out if there are national standards related to an area that have changed. So for example, school counselor, if KCREP changes its standards, then we're gonna look at that because we will probably make revisions that will keep us aligned with that. We make recommendations. We put together a work group. That work group makes recommendations to us. We then present those rules to our Educator Preparation and Pathways Committee of the Commission. They will look at that, and if they decide to approve that, then we will present that to the Commission. We also go through a process where new rules have to be have to fit the organizational structure of what new rules should look like, OARs. We generally will conduct a public meeting to review those rules as well. And then the modified new rules are presented to the full commission for approval. Those rules are adopted, they're implemented by the EPPs, and then we schedule a follow-up focused program review after 2 cycles of completer data are completed. So that's really the process briefly. Yeah, if you have any questions about this process offline, you can contact me at either 503-510-2251. That's my mobile number, or you can contact me via email, wayne.strickland@tspc.oregon.gov. We had a community of practice set of meetings to take a look at opportunities and challenges with our EPP standards. And so the question here that we asked is, what does TSPC think is important to name as opportunities and challenges related to revised EPP program standards for literacy in K-5? And so you see here that we've listed those pieces of feedback, that information. One of the things I think that really came out is that we need to somehow merge our reading program standards with our dyslexia program standards. The dyslexia program standards are newer, and for that reason, they're separate right now, but they really should be integrated with each other. We need to figure out how to bring all of our educators up to speed with regard to the current science of literacy and early literacy. We believe that that's best provided through professional learning and continuous improvement. We're all about continuous improvement at TSPC. Some of the challenges are how do we collaborate with ODE, which is responsible for the K-12 programs? How do we bridge gaps between the first-year teacher competency and district needs? We require that first-year teachers are fully ready to be in the classroom, but as you're aware, that's a process that continues on into the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th years especially. So these are the kinds of things that we have looked at so far that inform us as we think about the revision of standards. I hope I've left enough time for all the other things that we need to accomplish today. But again, thank you for the opportunity just to give you a brief overview. And I apologize in advance if you already know all about the the program standards, and I have been boring you for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Please forgive me.
So I think at this point, we have some time for questions specifically for Wayne and Kristen. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about some breakout so we can discuss further in detail. But before we do that,
and don't forget that our executive director is here as well. He may need to put his hat on to help us with some of these answers. I don't know. Any questions? Yes, Representative Wright.
Well, thank you, Wayne, for your presentation. As we move forward, of course, the proof is in the pudding, and outcomes are what's important. Standards are great, but if we don't have any teeth to reinforce them, then we end up with 40% of our kids only being able to read at third grade level. So I think we have to look specifically at the kinds of things that we're going to teach our teachers to make sure that when they hit the classroom, they have all the things that they need to make sure to help our students succeed. So I guess I'm looking and saying, I see the standards, there's a lot of verbiage there. My question is, how do we know that when a prospective teacher in one of our teacher prep programs leaves the facility and heads to education, that they understand and know what the standards are and how to teach them?
Yes, I'd be happy to take a stab at that. And then if one of my other colleagues wants to add something, please feel free to, and especially Dr. Rosiles. Yes, you're exactly right. Program standards by themselves are not going to really prove the point that they are competent in the classroom and they are able to generate the impact that they need to with our K-5 students. And so that's the reason why we have the follow-up that we have. Not only do we conduct the initial review of the EPP programs, but they are required to demonstrate to us that those candidates have sufficient knowledge and skills and dispositions to be able to function in the classroom. And so they do that through a number of ways because they closely monitor their clinical practices to be able to demonstrate that they are competent in the classroom. There also are required tests that those candidates must take, or assessments is the way we prefer to refer to them. And so we have national vendors that conduct those tests, such as NES Pearson, such as ETS Praxis, and they also are able to give us some level of confidence that this person is ready to be in the classroom through adequate performance on these exams, on these assessments. They generally have nationally normed cut scores that these candidates are required to demonstrate in order to be approved. And in addition to that, we're going to follow up with this. The EPP is going to be required to give us data because it's all about data. It's all about the evidence for the success of their programs, the effectiveness of their programs. And so we will conduct that follow-up review as well. In addition to that, obviously the national accreditation by Northwest Commission is going to give us greater confidence in that, as well as the national educator accreditors like CAPE and AQUEP.
I will add, if I can, Wayne, thank you. Representative Wright, another factor in our ability to succeed in ensuring that our candidates are meeting this work is the quality and the capacity when we do program reviews. I think it's an important background piece for this group to be thinking about, is that at the end of the day, we put a package together, recommended rules for the commission to think about, but then the commission also has a responsibility of ensuring compliance with these rules. And as a background piece, 5 years ago, there was only one employee in all of TSBC who wasn't a trained educator who was responsible for coordinating all the program reviews. the agency itself didn't have what I would call an arm, a cadre of people with expert in educator preparation that could go in and consult with the different program providers and provide a more detailed analysis of that. In the last 5 years, and with the thanks of the legislature and also and the commission itself, that we've increased that up to, we have 6 people in the educator preparation and pathways unit. And we know that no matter what we do with this work here, that what we're going to need is we're going to need to be able to have capacity, whether it's with TSBC or other ways that we think about this as a state, is that how do we really unpack what's happening at programs? Because every program will demonstrate, and they have to ensure that they're meeting each of those standards. And usually they do that by saying that here's the coursework or the assessments that are going to be used to address a particular standard for their students. But again, that is just a cursory piece of information, right? The proof is, as you mentioned, Rep. Boomer, the proof is in the pudding. And the agency has not had that capacity previously to really then unpack that. And with someone who really is knowledgeable, who can go in and say, let's look at this course in the syllabus that you have that's addressing these standards. Where can we provide other expert consultation for you? We're building that capacity, but all that capacity is very tenuous on continued funding. So I think one of the things we should always think about as we're developing recommendations is what are we going to be able to do with those recommendations, right? Because I don't think any of us in here want to go through all this work and just have them be a set of standards on paper, right? So I think that's an important piece to think about. So, and I think we should keep that in mind as we go through these next few months together.
Thank you.
All right,
Yes.
Julie was next.
Thank
Anita?
you. Am I off mute? There you go. So one thing about programs at the higher ed level is, as you mentioned, the clinical experiences. So we may do a really bang up job of, our instruction, but then when they get out into the field, there's not a lot of good modeling for them to have necessarily the best practices in reading instruction. So we have to also think about what's out in the field and how we bring the field along for those already licensed. Then my second piece was, as I looked at those standards, where are perhaps links to the ELP standards so that we consider multilingual learners and their needs. So just throwing that out there, that it's important not to forget that group of students.
Thank you. You're so right. That's absolutely necessary. One of the things that we do when we're looking at our program standards and this revision as well is we're going to need to look at those national groups like ELC and factor that into it so that we make sure that we are using the best evidence available, the best practices that are currently available. I would also mention that this is a partnership issue, isn't it? Because we have to depend upon the K-12 system to help us in those clinical practices. And so we depend upon them very heavily. And the EPPs are generally spending a lot of time to help train the K-12 practitioner about how to evaluate those candidates as well, so that we make sure that we get good, sound, reliable evidence that they are really doing a good job, a high quality job in the classroom and are ready to teach. And so, Anita?
I think
Anita, I
Senator
think you're
Denbrough
on-
is next.
Well,
okay.
Anita, go ahead, Anita. It's fine.
Thank you, Senator. I just did a keynote at Reading League for Higher Education, which was a delightful experience. But I will tell you one interesting thing that I just want to put out there. I agree with you, Julie. Finding teachers that are masterful is difficulty. But one of the researchers there is doing this, is requiring that the student be placed in a school district that has adopted curriculum that is based on the science of reading, so that the candidate could teach the materials using all of the data, all of the skills we've taught them in higher education. And it's less, then it helps fill that gap of not having people with that knowledge, Julie. So I just finished reading your book, so I can't wait to have a chance to go to lunch with you and talk about it. But here's the one question to Wayne. And Wayne, so we are a working group who's going to come up with standards, and hopefully the standards will be more specific than in the past, because they were so general that many times they could just pick whatever they wanted to do, and they say that this was reading intervention, and versus what is all the research on it that leads to certain standards. But let's say this group comes up with recommendations, but then it goes through another group, a commission, that decides if they're going to accept them. Is that true? So ours is not the final word. It is.
Well, certainly that's the way the process works. Thank you for your question. That's the way the process works. However, the commission includes also educators. They're very aware of the circumstances that we currently have with regard to early literacy. They know that there's a governor's executive order with regard to this issue as well. These are all influential. And my sense is that the commission listens very carefully to the staff recommendations, so that when Dr. Rosiles represents the staff and presents this set of standards, they certainly interact with it, they critique it, but they are very, very amenable to listening strongly to the experts. As Dr. Rosiles mentioned, in our particular unit, every one of them has extensive K-12 and higher ed or higher ed experience with regard to teacher education. So yeah, that certainly is going to be an issue. And I don't know what the influence of the council is going to be after that. But believe me, we listen and we act in response to the council. And it doesn't hurt that the council was put together by the governor. So I think that that's going to be very, very influential in terms of our marching orders.
If you don't mind, I have one more question. How do you select the assessments that are not written by your agency? They're written by other agencies that you contract with. Is that true? So
the knowledge assessments as well as the clinical practices assessments, yes, are written by outside vendors.
And how do you validate that they've used evidence-based for their questions? Because I was concerned that some questions that were reported to me would not have been the correct up to date. So
yeah. They're nationally normed. They conduct regularly reliability, validity tests. We also evaluate them. So whenever a new assessment is suggested, we have a process that we go through as well to evaluate them to make sure that they're appropriate. And we just in fact put out an RFI, a request for information to vendors to contract with us or set an agreement with us for the next cycle of exams.
So they need to test what is in the standards, and if there are new standards, they need to reflect that.
That's exactly right. Yes.
All right, I just want to do a time check.
Pardon? That's
I just want to do a time check because we're getting into some of our time where we can be doing breakouts. And I think all these questions you all have are fantastic. And I'm wondering if in our breakout rooms, we can keep track of all of them and get everybody a bigger chance to provide questions that we can then share back with our TSPC colleagues.
Do we want to let Senator Dembro make a comment?
Let's hear.
Yeah, Thank you very much. And Wayne, thanks for the presentation. If I had gotten to be first in the queue, I would have opened up the issue of the importance of the clinicals. Clearly, we're all thinking along those same lines. And I'm just wondering what the capacity is for TSPC to really closely, as part of the evaluation of the different schools, to really do direct observations of how the clinicals are going, how the institution's programs are partnering with school districts directly. And, just wonder if there are any national models for that. Are there other states that really are on top of this relationship, promoting the relationship, evaluating it, and encouraging it? Because I think that really is something that's going to come up again and again with this group.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a partnership involved in that, Senator Dembro. I appreciate your question. Until COVID hit, I regularly, for example, visit every EPP. And so I get an on-campus look at what the program is like. I talk to the individuals that are involved in it. If they're having challenges with the clinicals, I'm involved with that. We also have some organizations that provide training for clinical practices. One is local here in Portland. And so we're tracking on that as well. So we're doing a lot of that already, but certainly there may be room for improvement in that area as well. I think our staff is fairly limited, as you're well aware. And so there's only so much we can do. So we depend upon the universities, the EPPs to help us, but also the K-12s. We have a lot of interaction with K-12 systems as well, school districts, HR directors, as they're monitoring the candidates going through the clinical practices. We're very involved with OSPA, for example, and these issues come up often. So we feel like we've got our finger on the pulse of what's going on. And, it's a challenge because of that partnership. And as Dr. Brown mentioned, part of it is the strength of your impact is going to be based upon who your cooperating teacher is. And so that's the reason why we think that professional training piece is going to be so critical to help to people get up to speed with regard to this. I will say that as I've been going around the campuses, despite the fact that Oregon does not fare very well with their third grade literacy, people at the universities, at the EPPs are very aware of that, very interested in that, have been working hard on their campuses to deal with this. So this is a very timely council, I believe, because you're catching, I think, the EPPs at a time when they're really working hard to contribute in a positive way to the improvement of the literacy of third graders and beyond, actually.
All right, thank you, Wayne. Thank you for all of our TSPC staff for putting that together. And again, this isn't the last word or the last chance to ask questions, which are great. I know I'm capturing them. I know our TSPC folks are capturing them, and we'll get a chance after these breakout sessions to make sure that all those questions are captured and we can respond to each and every one of them as much as possible. So we're going to give you all a chance now to process what you've just heard or ask more questions in those smaller settings. Some questions we might want you to think about in those breakout groups are: what are your observations about current standards? What do you see that's well represented? Are there technical changes or structural changes that you're already starting to consider? For those of us who might say, well, it doesn't matter what we have in standards, it's about how they're implemented. Yes, and we'd still like you to consider the standards as one important piece in this bigger systemic implementation conversation that we're going to have as part of the council's June deliverable. So our breakout time is going to go quickly, and we'll extend it by 5 minutes since we started about 5 minutes late, I think. I'm making an executive decision. I hope that's okay, Rhonda. So we'll put you back in breakouts a bit later, again, to drill down deeper into reviewing these in relation to the early literacy framework. So now you're just looking at the standards that Wayne just went over with us. So Alex is going to open up these breakout rooms, and we'll come back at 9:55, and then we'll go into a 5-minute break. Okay. All right, I think we have everybody back. I know that my group ran out of time because we had such great conversation. No, this is the beginning and we will have more time yet. So at this point, we are going to take a 5-minute break. Just a reminder, if you can turn your cameras and mics off, that would be great. And we will be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everybody.
Susan, can you hear me? Not well. Okay, I'll try another thing. I'll let you go ahead and.
Go ahead, Rhonda. I can hear you now.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right. So for this next section, what we're going to be doing is really diving into words are hard today. Analysis of our standards in comparison to the literacy framework that we talked about last time. So with that, I'm going to introduce Erin Weeks-Erb from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission and Ken Greenbaum from Oregon Department of Ed. And they'll talk about this next activity and give us an overview of our breakout instructions. So take it away.
Thank you, Rhonda. And Ken, are you on?
I am.
So do you have a beginning part to this? Want to go ahead?
I think you're modeling first and diving into the activity, and I'll speak to the indicators once we show the page.
Okay. So we're looking for an activity that will help us understand how we're going to bridge the Oregon literacy framework with the EPP program standards and with other TSPC standards. So we're going to look at ways that they align and ways that they don't. We're going to work in breakouts to practice this, and then we're going to reflect afterwards. Ken, let's go ahead and share the tool.
Great. One moment.
Oh, and sorry if yep.
Are you ready to share that? Sorry, I thought you were sharing, but I'm happy to bring that an example up if you'd like.
I'll quickly find it, and if you could, oh, there it is. Thank you, Pooja. If Ken, you could walk through how to in your design read over these elements, and then I can look at the prompts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the goal again is to do some like synthesis or kind of alignment, so to speak, around the program standards we were speaking to and the content of the early literacy framework. And again, the framework is really important because it's what the executive order has charged this council to align the recommendations to. And so as we do that, we realize that trying to align the current standards to a very long framework is not like a one-for-one activity, especially with, I think, some of the observations around the different granularity or generality, some of the current standards. And so this is really requires us to do some sense making around providing your own lens of where there are strengths and opportunities to align. And so what we've tried to do here is provide a format. We'll have both facilitators and note takers. And what you have is both certain kind of most relevant parts of the reading instruction standards and dyslexia and other reading disability standards, as well as one or more sections of the framework. And you'll notice we've distilled parts of the framework in each section into kind of look-fors or indicators. And just a note on that, these are not all comprehensive of every single point or element or nuance that's in the standard. So we know there's limitations to kind of this kind of distillment of such a robust document. And we also want to make this a manageable task. And so, we're comparing, taste testing of two different dishes, not like each individual ingredient, so to speak. And so we wanted to acknowledge that in terms of the indicators. So there's 2 prompts there in terms of the reflection and discussion prompts. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Erin to kind of speak through what our discussions will be, but what you're looking at in each artifact is the EPP standards, one or more sections of the framework that are distilled in a way to make this somewhat more digestible.
Thank you so much. Yep. And here are our prompts. Are they on the slide?
So the prompts are actually on the worksheet that you all will have. And this slide is really just laying out what you're going to do. So this is a tool, and each group will have a different section of the Oregon Early Literacy Framework, such as the one I just screen shared was the Section 8, Reaching All, I think it was Section 8, Reaching All Learners. And so what you're going to do is kind of practice using the tool, looking at the current standards that TSPC just went over in relation to, as Ken said, those look-fors from each section of the framework. Some of you noted in some of the breakout conversations that the standards as they currently are written don't actually speak to the Oregon Early Literacy Framework. And that's fair because the framework was just developed earlier this year. And so this is now a time to kind of take a look at the current standards and say, how might we update them to really relate to the Oregon Early Literacy Framework in a way that connects to what the executive order has really charged this council to do. So this is going to be a tool that is really going to help us develop a shared analysis of the current standards as they relate to the Oregon Early Literacy Framework. And you will have one section that is really focused on instruction. And then every group will have the same two sections related to the conditions for learning around Section 1 of the framework related to belonging, as well as the family and community partnership section. So each group will have actually 3 different sets of the early literacy framework. And the one that will be in common for all of your groups is really around the conditions for learning. And so what you're going to do in breakout groups is that you're going to reflect on the prompts that your facilitator will put your Google Doc in the chat. And you'll just silently reflect on what you're reading, since you're reading it for the first time, the framework indicators as they relate to the standards. And you're going to write down your thoughts. And then in the round robin breakout group, the facilitator will allow every single person in the breakout group, because we do want to hear from every person who is on the council in the breakout, kind of go around and share what your individual reflections were. And then in the breakout, you'll also have like a full group discussion, and then we'll come back as a full group. So I think the breakouts are ready. Is that right, Alex?
Yes, they are.
And co-chairs, do we want to come back at, we had said 10:35, but does that still sound right? I think we actually are on time still. Okay, so we'll come back at 10:35 from our small groups.
All right, we have everybody back. Okay, so we are going to have a full group conversation. So let's go around and hear how you what you talked about within your breakout rooms, and we're going to start with the best group, which was group 1, because I was in that group. So we'll start with our facilitators and their notes that they took.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of facilitating group 1. I think that the biggest note is that folks said that we need more specificity. We could say that they could specifically follow the framework. We need to find a balance between being so explicit that it's prohibitory, especially when research changes. We know that the science of learning is an ever growing and ever developing field. And so making sure that we have a balance with specificity versus, broadness enough to allow for the expansion of knowledge. We wanted to talk about the models for reading, making sure that new teachers not necessarily know the models, but know the core features of the models so that they're able to, take a curriculum and understand what they're teaching and not just, kind of rote memorization of scripts within a curriculum. We want them to actually really understand kind of what they're teaching and why they're teaching, and allow them the autonomy and the agency to change materials and support the context of their classroom. And so allowing them the knowledge base to make those changes without going away from the key features of these models. We talked about the Big Five specifically in regards to that. We noted that the current standards don't speak to culturally responsive or asset-based instruction. And so we want to make sure that language is reflected in that context. And then we weren't really sure exactly how to bring in the conditions for learning. They felt very aspirational. They felt a little bit outside of TSPC's scope, but we know that they're valuable. We know that they're meaningful. And so how do we embed some of these key features of context into the literacy standards without being so broad? We talked about a lot of things, but Susan, anything else that I'm missing? Awesome.
Thank you. The next best group, group 2.
Next best, I don't know, but with that, quite a rich discussion. I'll do my best to capture some themes that was raised, but certainly do chime in, team, and or Pooja, if there's anything I missed. So wide-ranging discussion, really talked about a reflection that the current standards don't specifically or explicitly address the particular sections 1, 2, and 8 of the framework. Especially this idea of student belonging and family partnerships being an overarching idea or standards, not just pertinent to literacy. So how that might be considered in terms of how they're being taught more globally. How we've been focused on teacher prep, but also the importance of administrators, and that many of these ideas, it is critical for various reasons for administrators to have this as part of their preparation. How perhaps we model and include this engagement with families and students as both part of educator prep programs, what that can look like, the shared responsibility between TSPC and ODE in terms of the detail of these standards and outcomes. Coming back to this idea of what role do the standards and level of granularity or lack thereof play in the state of early literacy across Oregon, kind of that big question. Noting the absence of pre-K and how we have that as a front seat rather than an adjoining seat to this conversation. Language development as a critical factor in the role and connection to family engagement, and how we prepare teachers who are often nervous about family engagement to do this really well, understanding funds of knowledge and the role in early literacy. And kind of an assumption that teacher dispositions are included as part of these standards and that they don't really show up explicitly, and how that might look in terms of standards. Related to this idea of ideas or concepts and teacher practice, particularly around dyslexia and the long-term training around what is expected of initial teachers, what's the right level of knowledge. Again, moving from only kind of assessment identification to perhaps teacher practice. Lots more. I think I'll pause there. There are quite a few themes, but again, this theme of theoretical knowledge versus demonstrable competence running throughout. So group 2, I know that was a mouthful. I think our notes are more extensive. Did I miss any really important themes or ideas? All right. Thank you, Chip.
I'm just going to add one quick thing. Just that idea of integrating the English learner and striving readers across all of the standards.
All right, our next best group, group 3.
Thank you, Susan. So group 3 with Representative Boomer and Senator Weber and Director Cannon discussed first the two TSPC areas of standards that we're looking at and made observations about how broad and sort of flexible they are now, and how there's a definite recommendation to make them more specific. So building on the earlier conversation and the input that we had discussed earlier, they support and our discussion supported the idea that these two areas of standards could be merged together in a recommendation. And then we talked a little bit about what that would look like and how to implement Section 7 of the Oregon Literacy Framework around core instruction and assessment practices in that merging of the two. And so a couple specific things that came up were it would be important that there's a consistent and a common definition of dyslexia as this comes together, and that dyslexia continues to be in the forefront and supported by teacher practices and assessments and scaffolded with educator preparation around dyslexia. However, there are other ways that students may struggle with learning and with reading and with literacy. And so in the standards, we noted a couple places where rather than mentioning a dyslexia screening, it could have a screening that is for all students and incorporating areas of the framework. Again, the conditions for learning are oral screening earlier than kindergarten, potentially helpful here, and for teacher prep students to learn about those. We talked about, as previous groups have mentioned, including the big five in the reading instruction standards point 2, getting more specific there and looking for the right combination of words to make sure that the Oregon Literacy Framework was either referenced here in reading instructional standards, or that the specificity of the recommendations in the framework was included here. Around assessments, I did mention that would be for dyslexia and other reading disability standards. As they get merged, the point 4, apply dyslexia assessment and instruction knowledge to pedagogy and practice, or point 3, administering and applying screening. Again, we had an idea that potentially opening that to all students and to looking at different kinds of assessments that help teachers understand the strengths and the supports needed from all students in different areas. And we thought there were definitely some good bridges that could be built, and good relationships between Oregon Literacy Framework Section 7 and these this bundle of standards. And in my group, would anyone else like to add another comment?
I would just say, Julie, I saw your question about the oral language. And what I notice here at my school is that, you know, we screen our multilingual learners, but that's still not giving us information about all of our learners, like how where they're at with oral language acquisition. So that would then maybe, if we could support and develop their oral language, it may help mitigate what could be a reading difficulty further on. So it's just something we've been talking about, whether it's in story construction or how we look at that first before we rush right to letters and sounds. And I think the ELPA test screener does that for some students, but not for all.
Yeah, I was curious about that because there aren't a lot. There's not like a screener for oral language, and I was wondering. So maybe it's just
Yeah, but I think it's important when we think about, because we also just have different ways that students acquire language that impacts how they read. So I think it's something for us to think about when we think about assessments.
All right, and we are going to have our last group, which is actually group 2.
Yeah, the order went a little interesting. And Cheryl, I'll have you jump in here too, since we were both taking notes on this. So one thing that we had Wayne in our group, which was helpful because one of the first things we needed to kind of talk about is how the length of time that the OARs had been last reviewed. So he was able to kind of give us that background, especially around the reading instruction, that these are 10 years old and the dyslexia ones are just about 5 years old. And Anita commented about that the standards really aren't producing learning outcomes, where some schools and districts aren't necessarily teaching all evidence-based strategies. A lot of the conversation was looking at the program standards and how they will allow for various strategies that teach for early literacy, but there was some noting of that the reading standards themselves are vague. And that they need to be obviously updated, which was a consistent theme in the first group that I was in, where there was a lot of conversation about, there's a lot of open to interpretation of what evidence-based, for example, means, and how are we defining that, and is there calibration around that we all have shared meaning of that. So there was a lot of conversation of that. Shara, what do you is there anything else that
I think the only other thing we did get to the second part of that around the student belonging and family partnership section. And Dr. Strickland reminded us that we do have some specific standards that all EPPs are required to abide by in the culturally sustaining practices area. And so although it's not appearing here in these standards that we're reviewing, there are some standards required of EPPs.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It sounds like we have a lot of shared thoughts about what comes next, and I know that they'll be really helpful as we move forward. So with that, you had called for a second break, so let's take our second break. And so we will come back at 10:55. Again, if you can please turn off your cameras and microphones, we'd appreciate it. We'll see you in a bit.
Welcome back, everyone. So our next section of this process today is going to be for us to look at how some other states have addressed these similar issues. I think it's an important part of this next steps for us because we really don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from some of these other states as we are going through this process. So I have Kristen Rush and Aaron Weekser are going to lead us in this next section. So they'll give us an overview of what this next process is going to be. So I will turn it over to them.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. I'll kick it off and then Kristen can fill in any gaps. This reading part 2, the pre-reading that you received, is called a national scan, or a scan of other practices in other states. We wanted to tell you a little bit about how we put it together and how it's intended to be used, and then make sure you get your questions answered before we go into breakout groups to discuss further. So I'm going to screen share the reading. Hopefully it will be large enough to see. Hopefully you're able to look at this a little bit. So it's the one where it starts review of other states, compiled for you by the staff in the agencies. Again, the purpose of this is to help us reflect on the issues and the revisions that we're looking at, and the combination of supporting early literacy with strong educator preparation standards, and then strong implementation or initiatives that help to do that. Note, of course, that looking at other states can be very helpful. It helps us stretch our ideas. consider other ideas, but rarely is it possible to just wholesale take an initiative from another state and implement it here. Lots of different conditions and context differences make that impossible, but we often look to other states to check how they're solving the same problems that we're wrestling with. We wanted to make sure that you heard how this list of 9 states or so was put together. So when you had your initial conversations with Pooja and with the governor's office about joining the council, she was asking you if you had recommendations about other states' practices that are familiar to you because you worked there or because you have read about them. And so our initial list was constructed with your input. Next, we were also looking for states that had literacy specific pre-service educator standards. So trying to bridge that item that we're wrestling with now in other states' practice. We also looked at high school graduation rates and at NAEP proficiency scores in the 4th grade, just as general comparative sense of how the education system in that state is performing or how it's delivering education to students. And those are 2 very broad kind of comparable measures that we look at. So we're looking at states that are comparable to, so around the same in those measures or higher, broader. We're aspiring to grow in those areas. So those are the states that are here. And then lastly and importantly, Kristen was looking at states that also implement an equity lens or an equity plan that supports conditions for learning and good ways of engaging with students that are culturally sustaining, teacher practices, the way that our Oregon literacy framework has been set up. So in the handout, all the states that we included are presented in alphabetical order, not in any order of rank. I talked a little bit about the tool or the collection that we made. And the NAEP 4th grade assessment, just to note, isn't something that we would use to monitor our progress within the state. Necessarily, it's a snapshot in time. And there's a little bit more here if you're interested in learning more about NAEP as a percentage of 4th grade readers who are NAEP proficient. That's a specific definition, not necessarily aligned to the Oregon literacy standards or the State Board of Education here and their standards that they have. So the way that this is set up is that, and we did Oregon's here, we looked at 2 big picture factors, whether or not the state is implementing a literacy framework or a whole vision for literacy and early literacy specifically, and whether or not their implementation involves the educator preparation programs and their standards for preparing educators at the state level. I'm not going to go through every state, but California alphabetically is first, so I'll just go over that you have this indicator here about a literacy framework and the EPP standards, whether or not they are tied in. And then you have a summary with a lot of links, and this is a great document to help you navigate how to look and where to look at other states' practices. I wanted to talk a little bit about this. If you disagree with this assessment, it's either a yes or a no in every state. Just reach out and let us know. We made this assessment based on the language in the statute or in the initiative descriptions about whether or not they were referencing a literacy framework or not. If you have different experience, please let us know. That's not a hard and fast, that's a pretty quick judgment based on a read of their materials. And then same with EPP standards, it was either pretty clear that they were including educator preparation in the implementation of their early literacy or their literacy initiative, or it wasn't really there. And so we said yes or no. Kristen, is there anything else you want me to hone in on or that I forgot to mention?
I think that was pretty well-rounded. Pooja did mention in her email that this is all web-based research. We didn't actually reach out to any of these states. We didn't communicate with them. That is something that if this group recommends that we do, we're happy to do that. But this is just an initial kind of web review of states. Does anyone have any questions before we go into breakouts?
And it looks like we actually have a few extra minutes for breakouts. So, so we are going to be going into 4 groups, and a great thanks to all our facilitators and note takers again. And we'll be back. All right, another great group of conversations. I will not compare and contrast the groups because they are all the best. So let's hear from what were the big takeaways in those groups. So let's start again with group 1.
It's fine. I'll just always be group 1. And so I have my thoughts about being group 1. We had such like a rich and deep conversation. I'm going to try to summarize this, but I have like pages and pages of notes here. We really liked California standards, how they were specific on language acquisition and development and then linguistics. We had some questions around the dates of implementation. Some folks implemented literacy more recently, some longer ago. And so we had some questions around if they have data to suggest how successful their literacy initiatives have been. We had some questions around what other states with Native nations are doing and whether those nations are having good conversations with state agencies around early literacy, what's working with those education systems and what's not. We liked that Colorado included requirements to submit evidence that principals and admin had to demonstrate training. We liked Colorado's special license for mentors and supervisors. We felt like Colorado's requirements felt heavily on the districts. We didn't want to overburden administrators, superintendents, but we do like verification of ongoing professional learning for in-service teachers. We liked the states that had things like embedded frameworks, observation tools, competencies that were running parallel to standards. Let's see. Oh, we liked Utah and their competencies. We had some questions around why their competencies didn't align with their framework, but we were wondering about politics and the role that politics play in that. We talked a lot about MTSS and the importance of core instruction. Oh, and we really liked Washington's free professional development. And then we outlined some questions that we had for other states if we end up going down the road of talking to any of those states. Anything that I missed, Team 1? Awesome.
Oh, I was just going to add, again, the deep conversation of the alignment of assessments and the competencies that we're looking for. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then allowing, also thinking about alternative assessments for diverse candidates and continuing to investigate those.
All right, group 2.
All right, we had a really robust conversation as well. And similarly, there were some states that were kind of called out. There was one that the folks was questioning why not maybe include. So again, this was just a very initial scan, but New Mexico is brought up as a potential other state for us to think about and look at. A lot of folks had some familiarity with some of the states. That was kind of one of the other touch points, is how familiar are some of you, thinking about the seat that you serve in, familiar with certain states and their processes, because I think that's also very helpful in that familiarity. Utah was also called out as another one that folks were looking at. specifically around the tests that people have to take regarding literacy. There was a lot of conversation, again, more holistically around the specificity that's needed in the program standards, however, not being overly prescriptive. I think that was a very resonating theme that kept coming up as we were discussing each of the states and thinking about what that looks like for Oregon. And also I do want to give some props to my colleagues who put together this document. Rep. Weber was very complimentary. So Aaron and Kristen, great job in putting together this document for everybody because they found it very comprehensive to the conversation. The other big takeaway, and again, I'm going to let other folks come off screen or off mic and add to it, that I thought was really interesting is just the process that we're going about this. The council was recognized, or the members in that group was recognizing how we have the framework that we're working towards, as opposed to creating laws and very restrictive processes that might be more problematic going down that pathway. Shara, I also want to compliment you on your excellent job of note-taking. Some other things that you also heard while you were taking notes?
Yes, so some of the other themes I heard were regarding administrators and considering what's required of our administrators within role and what that looks like in practice in the field as they're supervising these teachers. It seems reasonable to expect that they understand these models as they are providing support and guidance for the teachers in practice in these areas looking forward. And that's something I don't believe we have currently at that kind of specific detail in role around administrators. And I think that, the other piece that was brought up is that we all know what the evidence-based practices are. We also know that for some students, we need to reach out into our toolbox and use other strategies because not all students are going to show the progress and be able to read using just these alone. So we just need to consider that moving forward as well. That was shared in our group.
I think one more thing that I just thought of too was there was a conversation around, well, we looked at these states that have the standards in place or just the scan of what that looks like. There was also the wonderings of what are the EPPs doing, right? So there's that connection of like, well, how does this look like, or what does this look like in the hands of the EPPs in these states with regard to these standards?
Okay, group 3.
Thank you, Susan. So group 3 also had a great discussion about what we were seeing from other states that might be helpful for Oregon. So I'll try and recap, and then I welcome anyone in group 3 to jump in and add if I missed anything. From the top, the council members in group 3 appreciated the example of Colorado, also as mentioned in previous groups, that they had a pretty strong principal and administrator preparation requirements. And so that's a great place to look for that. In Florida, our group appreciated the inclusion of oral language in their standards and also the very specificity, as we mentioned before today, about how well laid out and well aligned the Florida competencies are to IDA standards. It was mentioned that Ohio might be another good state to look at because they have a strong literacy framework in a way that it's implemented. So we'll look further into that. It was mentioned that it's important as we're looking at other states to see where a state framework implementing an equity lens, being culturally competent and reaching all learners might be modeled in educator preparation. And so looking for ways that shows up in educator preparation as well, and including family engagement, family and community engagement, and how that circles in. We talked also about to Lynn's last point from the previous group, North Carolina has a good example of the educator prep review. So a review of educator preparation programs and a really strong feedback loop for them. We also had mention of Utah and Massachusetts as California as pretty good examples. Anyone in group 3 want to add anything? Thank you.
Great. Last but not least, group 4.
Yes, and I'm going in the right order this time, so my apologies for jumping the line the last year out. With that, some similar themes, certainly around what lessons can be learned from states where things work, but also what didn't work. And so Colorado was mentioned in terms of yes, some strong standards in place, and in 2012 that they did not put some accountability measures, so to speak, around some of that work, having gone through a similar process as a state as we're going through now. And so, like, what can we learn around from other states, not only in what exists now with their path to standards revisions and teacher preparation. So Colorado is one state we spoke to and explored. Massachusetts was raised in terms of noticing the specificity named in the early literacy criteria draft that was linked in the document, with, I think, a leaning or recognition from the group of that level of specificity perhaps being a direction that we go. At the same time, understanding that not getting over prescriptive, I think this was named earlier, that, you know, not saying that everyone perhaps has to do the exact same thing, but the ideas, a framework, a direction, a common goal, North Star, and the ideas and practices, dispositions of what that looks like being present in standards. Also spoke about licensure requirements versus EPP standards and implementation, and where where the lever is and the change we're hoping to see. Where's the priority when we think about implementation, change, accountability, and other systemic pieces to address? Where's the proper place? Spoke a little bit about the arc of the work of the council in that regard, and just the dependency around the enforcement of standards, no matter their content, depending on many different contexts. The last theme I'd raise is the recognition, this idea that state standards do not always have this linear or direct relationship to what happens in higher ed classrooms. That was Director Ken, I think you were cut off at the end with that statement, but I think I captured that point there at the end. So with that, if there's additional themes that I missed, group 4, please do unmute.
I would just add, Ken, thank you for that great summary. That part of the meeting arc comment that we were discussing in our group is, you know, we've started to talk about assessments and obviously licensing standards. And if you look at the national scan, some states might not even have educator preparation program approval standards in the way that Oregon does. And so we talked about what are the different ways that states actually use policy and direction from the state to be able to influence what happens in educator preparation programs. And the intentionality of the deadlines in the executive order, with the first one being December 15th, really on the educator program approval standards. I know we keep talking about licensing, and that's really important in other aspects like assessments, but we recognize that all of these components are really deeply interconnected, and that we can't talk about standards in a vacuum without also talking about licensing, syllabi, assessment. So just know that we're hearing you, we're tracking, and the reason that we're kind of starting higher level in terms of program approval standards is with an intention so that it can help guide our work as we get deeper into what it looks like on the ground, with our North Star of the Oregon literacy framework kind of holding steady as a through line on this work. So just wanted to share that.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Rhonda.
Thank you all for such great conversations. Every single one of my breakout groups has been really just a lot of deep learning and listening and understanding. So I really appreciate that. We are going to kind of wrap up, but prior to that, one thing that we are planning for right now, Susan and I are working with this amazing team that Pooja has put together. Thank you for all of the hard work putting all these things together for us. That's been amazing. But our next steps in terms of the information sessions, we had initially thought that that might be hearing from educator prep programs within Oregon on their take on some of this stuff. But now today, after talking a lot about these states, I know in my breakout group, we also talked about, you know, hearing from some of the folks in those states who were on the ground and doing this same work with us. So I think we'd like to kind of get a pulse on what you're thinking, whether you think the next step for us is hearing from educator prep, because we know those voices are important and we need to have them tell us how they're seeing this roll out. But at the same time, with this looking at the standards themselves, would it be more helpful to you right now to have states come in and folks from states representing some of the ways that that might roll out in terms of the standards? So I don't know, Pooja, do we want them to put something in the chat, or how could we, or maybe we can open up for discussion first, maybe, and then we can maybe take some sort of poll at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think popcorning is just fine, but people can also feel free to do in the chat. And just to clarify, the question is not whether or not we bring in educators, administrator. It's really just what's the next thing building off of today's conversation is the most salient focus for the October 30th meeting. So not necessarily either or, but what comes first. So yeah, just.
And I should clarify that we were not just talking about just ed prep folks. We were talking about educators themselves, both principals, teachers, and also higher ed faculty. So just to clarify that. Dr. Esparza Brown.
I think that hearing from the states themselves allows us, I mean, we've taken kind of a broad scan on, let's go a little deeper and have discussions with the states. I think that's kind of the next level for me. So that's just my preference. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else have an opinion about that?
Rhonda, I would like to see the actual standards, because that's what we have to, our process might be different than some other states, but looking at their standards that they finally concluded, that was to direct higher education and licensure. That would be the interesting thing from states, is actually looking at what they concluded, so we can see, oh, that one's overly prescriptive, or that's not specific enough, or I think hardcore getting them from many states and then looking at them, and then you and Susan perhaps looking at, well, these seem to be the closest to our listing, and then having someone come in and talk about those. But honing in not on all the process, because we've got a process, it's different than anybody else, but the standards probably would reflect the same research.
Yeah, and actually in our breakout room, Anita, you brought up the idea of maybe having like side-by-side columns of these different states, so we can kind of look right across and see what their standards look like in comparison, and how they have aligned to a literacy framework or not, and that sort of thing would be helpful.
I'm hoping that we find one that's so brilliant that we say, woo, so brilliant, but we're going to edit it. Would you give us permission to do that? And they say yes, and we end up with the best possible product. That would be my vision, so that we don't feel that we have to create the writing of everything. We might edit a few, might add some introduction, but it seems that there's a benefit that we are the last. I mean, there's only a few states that have not done this, and we're in that short list. I should get you, because I asked Stephanie Stoller to send me the short list of states that have not done this, and it's really short.
Shanaz?
I just wanted to add, I'm as interested in the non-examples and the missteps. So looking for people who have the vulnerability or perhaps a different perspective from their experience than somebody who's going to be like, look what we did, this is perfect, and maybe not understand how their policy is not actually having the intended outcome. So finding somebody who has either the right multiple perspectives or vulnerability to say, hey, we did this and it didn't go so well, so maybe avoid this path.
Thank you. Rep. Boomer.
Well, thank you for today. First off, I'm really encouraged by everything that I heard and everybody's perspective. I do agree with Shanna about this situation. It's always important to listen to what the throes of birth in this project goes. I'd like to bring up a comment that Director Cannon said, and basically that was sometimes there's a disconnect between what the state does and what's happening with the EPPs, and I think that conversation concerning how they develop that and or how is it going. I mean, yeah, like it was mentioned, yeah, we created this wonderful standards, but does it move forward into the EPPs, and then hopefully does it move into the K-12 system? So I think experience is always good to hear from. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, if I can just jump in. Thanks, Rhonda. Since we have many people on this task force who are from EPPs, I would kind of throw the question out to them, to you all, about how you think your institutions themselves could be better consulted here as part of this. Does it make sense to have a session where they're all there talking about how they're responding to the literacy framework, or is it better for them to hear our initial recommendations first and then respond to those? Or, just from your perspective coming out of these institutions, what would be the best time and method for that? Because we obviously need to hear from them.
Go ahead.
Just my thoughts, we work really hard in the EPP. So, out of respect for the faculty, sooner than later certainly would be great. But I also want to remind us that which programs, it's important to include all programs that teach literacy, and not differentiate, it's just all multi-subjects, right? Special education does too. So be inclusive of who we, yeah.
Yes, Julie.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Do you have any recommendations in terms of timing? Because I think that was a good question. Is it, do we bring them in after we've sort of drafted some of these standards, or is it prior to that to inform it?
I think it would be better prior, certainly, so that they have a voice. There's going to be more buy-in, when there's a voice that they have in terms of the standards.
Thank you. Yeah,
but others.
I might recommend both and just because I think, we can certainly hear their perspectives. And so maybe one is kind of a survey or something that's sent out, and one is, a panel at one of our work sessions or whatever it might be. But I think, going to the earlier point by Katie, I think there's some times where we can talk about something generally, and then what it looks like actually in implementation might be really, really different. So I think hearing voices in multiple places might be good.
Okay, do you think, Susan, oh, we have one more? Okay.
Wayne, yes.
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just want to concur with what Susan said. I think that getting feedback from them along the way is going to be very helpful, so there are no surprises and so that they are fully involved in this. I think one of the strokes of genius in this council is to have co-chairs from the EPPs, because they are the most immediately affected by whatever we decide to put together. And so I don't know who's responsible for that. Maybe Pooja was responsible for that. I just marvel at your wisdom in doing that. Thank you so much.
So, Pooja, do we want some sort of, or Susan, do you want a survey of sorts? Like whether folks want to put in the chat, whether they prefer Educator and EPP voices, or to the survey of the states as our next work session?
Well, I'm curious if we actually do, I'm hearing a little bit of both, and I wonder if that's a good way to thread the needle. It seems like this group is really thoughtful and like wanting to make sure that anything that is high level is also at the same time thinking about how it gets translated in classrooms, both at the fact, in the ed prep as well as in the school. So I wonder if we actually try to have a mix of a couple panelists from educator preparation programs in the state, and maybe someone from a couple of ed prep programs or a state representative from other states, and we kind of have a conversation and a panel discussion about that, policy and practice kind of conversation, and include some of the what are some of the pitfalls that we can learn from. How does that sound?
I wonder, that sounds really interesting. Go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I wonder too, in terms of what Dr. Archer had said about being able to see the standards from the different states, because I would like to be able to look at those before talking with folks from those states, to have time to kind of look through those. And so it could kind of guide some of our questions that we might have for them.
I think one thing that would be interesting is to send to people who teach literacy courses and take a list of the instructional part of the framework that was built for Oregon, and just have them say, this is very never included in our subject, this is a lot included, and this is very definitely included. There's a reason for it, because in signing it out, you're also getting geared up to what you might do, get to do in relationship to our committee. And so, and just the instructional part of the, and just listed right down the road, and that they would rate from very not intentionally in our program to very intentional to mastery. I mean, sort of kind of a continuum. I would find that really interesting, but it's also a way to set their cognition on, oh, I can see what's coming, because this committee has to have the standards match the framework. So we're looking at the framework. And so that's always really useful.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I think we are getting really close to time to sign off for the day. And I think Susan and I and the team from the governor's office have some conversations to have, but I think we will try to consider everything. Pooja, we do have a feedback form again this time, is that correct?
We don't, but we can definitely create one and send it out like we did last time. Absolutely.
Pooja, did you send to us everybody's email?
I think we haven't done that yet, but we can.
Because there's some people that we might want to send things to or connect with. And thank you for doing that.
So our next work session is October 30th. And so we'll be getting together as a team and figuring out exactly how we can structure that. I do like the idea of the side-by-side standards so that we can have that before we meet this next time, even for the work session. We have the November 15th as our next council business meeting, and then November 17th, another information session. before our November 20th council meeting. So we have quite a bit coming up, and we really appreciate the time and effort you've put in. We're going to try to turn things around a little quicker so that you have materials as early as we can possibly get them out so that we're prepared for each of these sessions. But thank you so much for your time. Susan, do you have anything to share before we sign off?
Just to echo, thanks to everybody and especially the great team who made all of this possible. Thank you.